What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. Tons to get to on this week's episode. We have the great Mike Renner in with us this week, friends, to talk to us about some terrific trios. Yes, we're going to go through the first 3 rounds of the draft and look at the Patriots picks at number 31, at number 63, and number 95 overall. And we're going to try to address what I view as maybe their top 3 needs when we're talking about a tackle of the future, we're talking about an edge defender, and maybe a little extra juice at wide receiver. We're going to run through all the different permutations. Okay, what if they go wide out first? Then do you go tackle or edge next? What if you go tackle first? Are you going edge or wide out next? And then how do you fill out that third need with that third pick at number 95 overall? Mike is just such a tremendous guest for us to do an exercise like this one because of his breadth of knowledge of these prospects already. It runs deep, friends. So while you and I may be here, and listen, I wouldn't blame any of us for focusing on, say, the top 60, 65. You're really focused on those first 2 rounds and maybe the Patriots getting some starting caliber types of players there if they don't trade one of those first 2 round picks. But then we get into the 3rd round and you start to hear some really interesting names, and hopefully we'll be introducing some new names for those of you at home that you haven't heard yet, that sound intriguing, that sound like Mike Vrabel types, that sound like they could be filling those needs that the Patriots have sooner rather than later. So great conversation with Renner. We're going to get to that early in the pod here. I want to mention, though, when we come back, we're going to talk about day 1, 2, and 3 fits at tackle that maybe Mike and I didn't go over because I just wrote up a piece based on some conversations that I've been having with people throughout the league on who the Patriots might be interested in at that all-important position. So, if they go for it in the first round, maybe second or third, and then maybe you're taking a flyer on a guy, who are some of those names that I've been hearing? So that piece is up for you on NBC Sports Boston. We'll run through some of those names. We'll also hear from Bill O'Brien at BC's Pro Day and why he thinks some of his guys might be good fits for Mike Vrabel in Foxborough. Vrabel was at the BC Pro Day this week when we were there. You saw Ryan Cowden there, Vice President of Player Personnel. You saw Tony Kinkela, who is the Director of College Scouting for the Patriots. Mike Smith, outside linebackers coach. You saw Doug Marrone, offensive line coach. The Patriots very, very well represented at BC's Pro Day, and you understand why. But there's the potential because of all the relationships there. Mike Vrabel's son has worked at BC. Doug Marrone was working at BC under Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien, Mike Vrabel, great buddy. So there's the potential there for, maybe a little bit of a pipeline. Maybe you start to see some BC players work their way down Route 1 to one Patriot place. And so who might those players be? And why does Bill O'Brien feel like his players would be good fits wherever they end up in the NFL? We're going to hear from some of those guys later. We're going to take some of your mail. But first, let's get to our conversation with Renner. There he is, our good friend. Great guest for the Next Pats podcast. Every chance we get the opportunity to talk to this guy, Mike Renner, CBS Sports, host of the Pushing the Pile podcast. Mike, you're an incredibly busy human being right now. We appreciate you being with us.
I'm not that busy. I mean, I'm working a lot, but it's not like I can always make time for you, Phil. It's just watching prospects. I always got the time.
I don't know about that. I mean, the number of prospects that you eventually come to know and that I'm sure already know, there's only so much time in the day. You can only grind so much tape. I mean, I don't know. I feel like, there's a chance. Listen, I'll grant you this. There's a chance you've been wearing that hooded sweatshirt for the last 2 weeks. I don't know. I don't know. There is a chance that is the case, but I know you're an incredibly busy guy. And I wanted to actually ask you first, Mike, before we really launch into what I'm calling our terrific trios. But when you're in this process right now, and it's late March, and you're trying to get a feel for these guys, not only as players, but as people, what's one maybe sort of under the radar way in which you can get to whatever conclusions you end up getting to on some of these people?
I am pretty comprehensive in my process. I will take anything into account. And one of the biggest things I've come to learn, I think, is, and obviously this is kind of old scouting adage, but like who these guys are matters, and their passion, and basically what they're going to bring to a locker room. So I'll watch. When I'm watching the tape, I'll go and watch, sometimes only a minute of an interview, but I want to see them in interviews and answering questions about, how they got into football. Is kind of like one of the biggest things I love to hear, is like what really they love about the game. Because at the end of the day, everyone comes into the NFL, or vast majority, sometimes top 5 picks, not necessarily, but everyone comes in the NFL with something to work on. And what separates kind of the good from the great, what separates the guys from the make it, the ones that don't, more often than not, is just who's willing to go that extra mile. So finding those guys, I think, is something you can see more often than not if you really are looking hard for it in the pre-draft process.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. This is something that I've been doing too, when we've been trying to figure out, okay, who might fit for the Patriots, who might not, especially these last few years in a post Bill Belichick world, and especially with Mike Vrabel now for the foreseeable future. This is going to be a program where you can't take yourself too seriously, because Vrabel's going to bust chops. He's going to come after you in meetings, and he's going to do it in a way where you're not necessarily feeling bullied or anything like that, but it's a true locker room environment where the expectation is you're going to develop relationships with everybody in there, from the players to the coaching staff to the people that are giving you food in the cafeteria. And so I like watching these interviews too, because you can tell, is there an ability to connect? Is there an ability to have a conversation? And listen, sometimes these answers, as you know, Mike, are really canned, and these guys are trained to give the cliches, and you might not learn a whole lot about them. But I do think there's a way that you carry yourself that is impactful, and that for a program like Vrabel's especially, I won't speak for any of the other 31 teams, but like that sort of stuff does matter. So I really like watching that stuff too, and it sounds like it's become part of your process as well.
And I'll say this, a lot of times, as outsiders, as fans, we're like, why did this team pass on this guy? Or why, he fell to them and they passed on him. They probably wouldn't have drafted some of these guys if they were in this, fell another round later. Sometimes they're just off their board entirely because, as you mentioned, you have to build a cohesive unit. You can't have guys who are out of lockstep with the culture you're trying to build and expect that it's just going to go okay. Those are just headaches you don't need. And so even if a guy might be incredibly talented, you might just not want that guy in your locker room because of the potential downsides that it brings to other players if they were to be there.
All right, Mike, I want to ask you this before we really launch into some of these players who might be fits in the draft for the Patriots. There's this looming situation here in New England with A.J. Brown, and you do so much covering the league as well as the draft. And I'm sure one of the reasons why the Patriots would be interested in A.J. Brown is because they've made that human connection that we're talking about with this guy and their shared time in Tennessee between Vrabel and Brown. And Vrabel's made it very clear they still share a close relationship there. What would you do if you're the Patriots? Would you be willing to give up that, say it's a draft day deal? I know there's this whole thing with the cap, and maybe they have to wait till June 2nd. They could get the deal done if they wanted to get the deal done today. So if it's a draft weekend kind of trade, would you be willing to give up that number 31 overall pick? Would you be willing to give up maybe a first-round pick next year in order to acquire that guy, or would you be more tentative?
I definitely wouldn't want to give up a first-round pick next year, I think is the biggest thing. I'd avoid that just because of the unknown of where that pick could end up. Just, worst case scenarios have happened before. A lot of teams that thought they weren't going to give up a high pick, the Falcons this past year, the Texans when they ended up giving up the number 4 overall pick way back when. Things can happen where could be a valuable pick. But 31, I would think about in this draft. Now, I wouldn't do it until I'm on the clock, depending on who falls to me. But I do think 31 in this year's class is not going to be a great spot. I have not seen a big difference between guy who's 30 on my board and the guy who's 60 on my board. It's just that's kind of the way this year is shaping up. So if the landscape gets kind of barren and the potential to add A.J. Brown is there for that pick, and given his game, given his skill set, given what you need for the Patriots roster, I think a first-round pick, you're getting 3 good years of A.J. Brown, right? Still, a guy who turns 29 this summer. So because of all that, I think I'm willing to do it if I'm the Patriots.
I like that. Okay, so maybe we see some fireworks on Thursday night, round one of the draft. I mean, it's certainly a scenario that you could probably envision playing out, right, Mike? Like, okay, I think the Patriots need a right tackle of the future. I don't think you can necessarily depend on Morgan Moses just being that guy there every week the way he was this past season when he was playing through injury, and he's 35 years old now. But those tackles tend to go pretty quickly. So if by the time you get to 31 and they're gone and you don't love the edge defenders that might still be there, like, okay, then maybe it does make a little bit more sense to give up that first round pick. Okay, let's get to our terrific trios here, Mike. This is a fun game we're going to play here. Great to do it with you because of your breadth of knowledge of these prospects, so we can go into, deep into a top 100, for example. The Patriots have pick 31, they have pick 63, and they have pick 95. Those are their first three picks. And the way I've been looking at this is I see three real needs. You could argue there are certainly more, but I think tight end they addressed a little bit with Julian Hill. They still have Hunter Henry, so I don't know if they're necessarily going to go there in the top 100. We'll see. They could go linebacker. They could go safety. But I'm looking at tackle. I'm looking at edge. Those to me are the two most pressing needs. And then let's throw receiver in there because we know they're looking at A.J. Brown, and if they feel as though they need that big-bodied X receiver, they could pair him with Romeo Doubs, who can do a little bit of everything. They have a pretty well-rounded group there if you're able to add that type of player. So let's look at those three positions. Let's look at their first three picks, and let's just go through the different scenarios and see what we can solve for the New England Patriots. And since we're talking about A.J. Brown, let's, I guess, start with the first scenario, Mike, being they go for a receiver in the first round. If they were to do that, who do you would maybe be the best fit, best player they could get at 31 at that position? And then we'll try to figure out how they solve those other positions with those next two picks.
I think Omar Cooper Jr. is the one I would look at, the Indiana wide receiver, especially if you're trying to replace, Stephon Diggs in that role he had in the offense, because Cooper is much more of a yak slot underneath weapon who has some speed. I think he's not pigeonholed into that, but he's very good at just that. So I think he's the one I would look to. Now, if you're looking more X wide receiver, Denzel Boston, I think is the guy who would make the most sense there, the Washington wide receiver. But to me, he's a little bit more limited and more of an early to mid-day to second round sort of guy. So Cooper's the one that if he falls there, that is the one I'd probably pull the trigger on, or, obviously the A.J. Brown trade as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think the signing of Doubs has really given them some flexibility. Like, if Cooper's there, you don't necessarily need to go and get, say they're choosing between Boston and Cooper. If you like Cooper more, you can just go get Cooper and then play Doubs as more of your traditional X, and then you can use Cooper as that Diggs interior short to intermediate type of guy and sort of fill out your room that way. It feels as though by signing Doubs, they've just allowed themselves, I mean, even if they feel like they don't want to trade or they want to give up whatever Howie Roseman's asking for A.J. Brown, you don't have to really do that either. Like, you could go into the season with the receiver room you have right now. It's not going to be one of the best in the league, but it's a representative room at least. I really like Omar Cooper's game too. Boston's an interesting one. I would fear for the people of New England, Mike, if they took Boston at 31 overall.
I know where you're going.
Not that he's not a good player, but like, how quickly do we get the N'Keal Harry comps? He didn't run a 40 at the combine. He didn't run a 40 at his pro day. I don't know if you're concerned with his speed, but like, big body, contested catch guy who might not be that fast, I think would make a lot of people scared here.
Well, and also the school. I mean, obviously Patriots haven't had great success coming from there. And truly, like, I'm not on board with him at pick 31. I want that to be clear. I think that's too early for his skill set, but he's more of, if you trade back to the second round, or if he's still on the board at the back of the second round, then it's worth the risk. But to me, that's a little too rich for all the things you mentioned. And I just think he's going to be limited in the role he plays at the next level. Okay,
so where would you be thinking about going next? Okay, you've got your receiver, you got Omar Cooper. You still need that next guy at right tackle. You might need a starting caliber kind of edge defender. I don't know if there's going to be one there at 65, Mike. But are there names that you like in that range for either one of those spots?
There really is only one day two offensive tackle in this draft class. Like, in my eyes, there's one guy who really fits that mold, fits that bill, and it's Caleb Tiernan from Northwestern. And that's it, unfortunately. So it wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't even make it to 63 because of that. And like I said earlier, that the offensive tackle class could be cooked by even 31 because of that, because there's just not going to be a second wave of offensive tackles. If you don't get one in the first round, chances are you're not getting one in this draft class because day 2 is so weak at that position. So he's really the only one that I would consider at 63. I think edge is a lot more interesting at 63, in my opinion, than it is at 31. Some guys could fault him at 31, but at 63, there's just a lot of day 2 talent, I would say, in this edge class that's going to need to get sorted out. And the one I really love for the New England Patriots that, if he's there, just feels like a Mike Vrabel sort of edge is Jayshon Barham from Michigan, because he was a guy who started his career at off-ball linebacker, really moved to edge out of necessity this past year. But you watch him setting the edge as a guy who used to be an off-ball linebacker, and you see a level of physicality that's truly, honestly, unmatched even in this entire edge class. So outside of Reuben Bain and Arvell Reese, who aren't going to last outside the top 5. So he is a physical player there off the edge that, again, for this Patriots defense, I think Mike Vrabel would fall in love with his skill set.
I like that name a lot. Our buddy Field Yates from ESPN just gave Barham to the Patriots in his most recent 2-round mock, and so that would make a lot of sense to me, and somebody who can, which is an area in which I think they lacked last year, Mike, the ability to set the edge. They had a couple of undersized guys, and both Harold Landry and Kayvon Chason, and there were games, the Baltimore game, which they ended up coming back and winning, in part because Baltimore stopped running at the Patriots' edges. Like, for some reason, John Harbaugh stopped giving the ball to Derrick Henry, who was unstoppable that night. But that was one of the reasons why they found themselves in a hole, was they just kept attacking Chason on the edge, and there was really nothing the Patriots could do about it. So if they get somebody who has that physicality, who feels like he's got some untapped potential as a rusher too, Mike, because like you said, he's been playing off the ball. Like, you put him with Mike Vrabel, who's done a lot of coaching of edge defenders and outside linebackers in the past. Like, maybe you get an even better player. He ends up being a steal for you in the second round. Okay, so if you bypass Tiernan, now we're really putting you on the spot, Mike. You just told me there's only one day 2 tackle. He's out. We drafted Barham in the second round. Is there anything you could do in the third at that 95th overall spot at tackle that it is at least interesting in your mind?
Yeah, there's 3 names that I think will come off the board, I think, in this range. 2 are tackles in college, but I think a lot of people want to move them to the interior. It's Trey Zune from Texas A&M, Carver Willis from Washington. Both had under 33-inch arms. Both are really kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel from a play strength perspective to stick at offensive tackle and, hold up to guys like Will Anderson and their bull rush potential. So those 2 are they're flexible. I think they could maybe stick at offensive tackle if they get stronger in time, but that's why they'll drop to this point in time. And then the other one is a true tackle. I think he will go at this point in time. He's really intriguing because he's had a pretty strong upward trajectory to his career and had a really great year this past fall, but it was at Memphis. And it's Travis Burke, who is 6'8", very prototypical tackle traits. He's not the most athletic, but he's very smooth. And I just was very impressed when I went back and watched him from 2024 to 2025. It looked like he made a massive leap. So I'm always intrigued by those guys. And if we're getting to this point in time, you're not getting a day 1 starter, but I think in time he could grow into a starter, even if I wouldn't call him like a high-end athletic project by any means.
I love that you brought up that name, because he just made it into our quote-unquote best fits piece at offensive tackle. And the size is there, obviously. I think he's 6'8", 6'9". He's somewhere in there. Athletic enough, as you mentioned. But, Mike, violent as all get out, like Captain Finisher, Captain Pancake, whatever you want to call him. It feels like, there are so many clips you can find of this guy just burying people. And again, for a Vrabel team where like one of their core tenets is effort and finish, that's a guy, and they reportedly brought him in for a 30 visit. Like, that's a guy who would, at this stage of the draft, maybe make a lot of sense for them.
Yeah, and he may go earlier, again, just because if, like the other guys I said, might not be tackles on other boards. After Tiernan, there's not a lot of day 2 tackles. And this is a guy who at least has the prototypical traits of a tackle. There's not a lot. So that's why I kind of advocate 31 if one of them's on the board. That's where I want to address tackle. I always advocate for addressing tackle early because the day 2 tackle always looks better on paper than it usually ends up in the NFL.
Okay, so scenario 1, we've given the Patriots Omar Cooper Jr. from Indiana at receiver. Then we gave him Michigan edge defender Jayshon Barham, and then Memphis tackle Travis Burke. That's not a bad haul, in my opinion. I like what we've done here already, Mike. Let's cycle through a couple of other scenarios quick. We'll have some crossover names, so we'll be able to get through this really quickly. If they go tackle, and that's sort of what I've been pushing, and I think I just defer to help your quarterback. You know, you would hate for something to happen week 1 for Morgan Moses, and then you're not sure what you're doing at right tackle the rest of the season. It does feel like, I know you're not a huge fan of this position, and a year, 31 overall, like you're not getting a superstar in the draft usually, but it does feel like there's a chance, Mike, that maybe some interesting right tackles fall to that stage late in the first round. So if they go tackle first, who would be a name for you that would be worthy of consideration?
I think it's 2 guys, truly. It's either Blake Miller from Clemson or Maxi Honachor from Arizona State. They are the guys who could fall to that range. They are both right tackles only throughout their career, and they're both great athletes. I think that's the interesting part of this tackle class and why I think it could be just, like I said, cooked by 31, that they could all be off the board by that point in time, is because when you look at their combine numbers, these are all guys with the kind of numbers that can turn into high-end starters at the next level. I'm not saying they will be, but when you watch Blake Miller, who was a 4-year starter at Clemson, from his freshman year to sophomore year, junior year, senior year, it's like every single year he got better. I was not a fan of his after his sophomore year. I was more of a fan of his after his junior year. And then when I watched the senior tape, I was like, this is a different guy altogether. That's what you want and need at tackle. And especially then he goes to the combine and tests extremely well. I'm sold on him as a first rounder, especially at this point in time in 31. Ihanachor, the tape is less exciting, I'll say, in terms of pure performance at this point in time. But the guy didn't start playing football until college. He was not a high school football player and tested out as one of the best athletes in this draft class. So the, again, progression that I've seen from the fact that he's so new to football, I'll take that chance because of, 1, how valuable tackle is, 2, how easy to identify the guys who will be successful at the next level is that position. And then 3, just for the New England Patriots, your timeline's not right now. Really, you have Morgan Moses, your timeline's year 2, year 3. And by year 2, year 3, he could be certainly a starter at the NFL level. So it's one of those 2 guys is who I'm eyeing if I'm the Patriots.
If there was it, listen, I like Ihanachor a lot, soccer player, basketball player growing up. Like you can see that. It's really athletic mover, apparently had a great Senior Bowl. So that would make a lot of sense and would be maybe just like the perfect fit, Mike, because again, you do still have Morgan Moses. So he's going to have the job at right tackle. If you feel like because he's a latecomer to football, he could use a little bit more polish, like this could be the perfect situation for him where he gets to develop for whether it's half a year or a full season, and then maybe hits the ground running in 2027. I just like having that insurance policy there to help out Drake May. Okay, so if they're at 65 and say they take Ihanachor, are you still going edge there because you just like that group better in the depth, or is there maybe a receiver in that range that you would say, okay, for the Patriots, say they don't end up going after A.J. Brown, X name would work?
I really like Antonio Williams here. Again, if this is more, I'm thinking replacing the Stephon Diggs role.
Sure.
He was a slot receiver at Clemson. I think he can be a little bit more than that in the NFL, but I really do like him as a slot receiver. And you look at their offense, they got banged up this year. Week 1 went out against LSU, and then the stretch he was out, that was like when Clemson's season ended. Their offense was abysmal over that span. And when he came back, they all of a sudden looked a lot better offensively. And he is very reliable. He's got really good hands. I think he's rugged over the middle of the field. And I think if he didn't get hurt, he would be closer to the first round conversation than back end of the second round. But I think if he comes off the board in this range, if he's still on the board there, I would love him for the Patriots. And I have him actually higher on my board than Denzel Boston. I just think he's a much more well-rounded route runner and can do a little bit more in modern NFL offenses.
Okay, I like this pick too because I know just following it, as big a nerd as I am when it comes to this stuff, there are a lot of people really high on Antonio Williams as like maybe one of the best receivers in the class before the season began. And now it's like you never hear his name mentioned with these guys that we're talking about a lot because the Patriots are picking at 31, guys that are considered late first round picks. So I really like that. And again, you could have Dobbs be your outside guy, have Williams be your Diggs replacement, and you're off and running. So now, okay, now you're at edge though, and say Barham's gone. your guy that you really liked in the second round. Is there anybody there that you would be looking at and saying, okay, yeah, this group has Draymond Jones and Harold Landry. Like, I could see this guy, if not right away, but eventually being like a true top 3 edge defender for a championship hopeful kind of defense?
I think there's 2 names I'd probably hope fall to this range then if Barham's not there. And it's Joshua Josephs from Tennessee. I think he is at least a good run defender and has a great frame to play the edge. He's undersized, but he plays physical and has I think almost 7-foot wingspan for a guy who's like 6'3", just a very well-built edge defender who is another guy who I think got better every year. And there's still some developmental potential there for him. He's one. And then the other one is a little bit different route, but I'm looking more just, they have the interior presence. Give me a guy off the edge with some juice who can rush the passer. And it's Romello Height from Texas Tech. He is older. He's 25. He's on the smaller side I think he weighed in 239 at the combine. But I watch him and David Bailey on that Texas Tech defensive line, and there's not really a huge gap in terms of how they both rush the passer. Now, Bailey's a much more projectable athlete, and that's why he's going to go top 10. He's much younger. But Romello Height knows how to get after quarterbacks, and he'll fall to this range, again, because he's older, because he's smaller, because that's really the only role he can play in a defense. But if you could still get a guy at this point in the draft who can rush the passer, who you know can, I think you take that every single time, especially with the fact that you're probably going to have a lot of leads if you're the Patriots. You're probably going to be playing from ahead. You're probably going to have a lot of obvious pass rushing situations. That's a guy that will help right away.
It's a great point because they have Barmore and Milton Williams for the interior. You know, like you just need somebody who can get off that edge, maybe take advantage of a one-on-one situation because there's so much attention inside. Even Draymond Jones, Mike, like on third down, his best spot getting after the quarterback might be inside. Yeah. So like, yeah. I think getting somebody like that, even if he is a very niche kind of role, especially early in his career in the third round, that could be great value. You know, this is a team that took Josh Uche in the second round years ago and never ended up panning out the way they wanted to. He had basically one good year, but like that was it. He wasn't playing on first and second down. The guy weighed like 230 pounds. He was tiny, but he was a great athlete. And it sounds like height would sort of fit that same mold potentially. Okay, so I like this trio here. For the people scoring at home, our second trio, Maxi Honichor, a tackle from Arizona State in the first round, then Antonio Williams in the second round to play the slot out of Clemson, and then Romello Height. Let's give him Romello Height, the edge defender from Texas Tech, in the third round. All right, last quick scenario here, Mike, because I think we've basically gone through just about every possible permutation here. Mm-hmm. But if they end up going edge defender in the first round, that's the one position we haven't talked about in terms of the early guys just yet. Is there somebody there in this class? We've heard a lot of Cassius Howell. We've heard a lot of Zion Young, two very different types of players there. Yeah. Would it be one of those or somebody else that piques your interest at the bottom of the first round?
It would. It's Cassius Howell to me. He's just good. Like the arm length, I get it. It's worrisome. It's going to hamper him a little bit, but the guy knows how to play football. He knows how to rush the passer. I don't want to kill Patriots fans too much, but just go watch him against Will Campbell last year. I mean, he probably, I remember watching Will Campbell's tape and saying Cassius Howell gave him the most problems of any defensive lineman they faced all season long. That's, against the best competition, he still got the job done. Now, I think he could be, his ceiling is not going to be Micah Parsons, right? With that arm length, he's just going to be a touch limited. He might not dominate the best offensive tackles in the NFL because of it or have struggles against longer offensive tackles because of it. But I think if he gets favorable matchups, he'll win a lot. And he's also a guy who wins to the edge. And I love when you get interior pressure, when you have those guys who are going to get pushed up the pocket. I love pairing that with guys who run around offensive tackles who can really bend to the top of the pocket because they get a lot of sacks that way. That's how, the Steelers guys get a ton of their sacks is Cam Hayward makes them step backwards. TJ Watt finishes the deal. That's what Cassius Howell kind of is. He's in that mold of those Steelers kind of 3-4 outside linebackers. Really interesting. And it gets to that conversation we were just having about height, it's the same mold, but a much sort of higher end version
is how I would guess that you would sort of term it, Mike, if you're willing to take Cassius Howell in the first versus height in the third. And so the arm length, I'm just looking at it right now, 30.25 inches. The people here in the great region of New England, Mike, I think we'll have some fun with that at the very least, if not be scared by it. After taking Will Campbell in the first round last year, those will be some epic, sort of almost like T-Rex on T-Rex training camp battles between Height and Will Campbell. But listen, Will Campbell was a top 5 pick for a reason. And to hear, and it's really interesting, I'm going to have to go back and try to find that tape, but to hear that Howell handled himself as well as he did against Campbell a couple of years ago, that really says something. And you're not as productive as Howell was at Texas A&M, playing against great competition without being a really good player, despite whatever limitations you're dealing with in terms of length. So I really like that pick in the first round. I think it takes care of a real need that the Patriots have. Would you be comfortable playing him on first and second down, or is he going to need some seasoning before they trust him in that regard, Mike?
I think so. I think he'll never be like a great edge setter, but he can make plays in the run game. He can get to the edges of offensive tackles. He has great bends, and him versus Romello Height, I think the biggest thing is he's like 253. He is not small. And especially when you're not long, when you don't have this wide frame, 253 is actually more impressive. It's a little bit even more sturdier guy. So he is sturdy off the edge. Just that length will be an issue when it comes to truly setting an edge, getting off blocks, but he can play around blocks well.
All right, let's give the Patriots Northwestern tackle Caleb Tiernan in the second round. He's your guy, 6'8", good power, it looks like, and played a lot of football, and so he feels like a good fit for the Patriots there. So they've taken care of the trenches. Is there a third-round receiver? And I know you like yourself some Brendan Thompson out of Mississippi State, but is there a third-round guy? I don't know if he makes it that far. Is there somebody else that you look at for the Patriots and you say, yeah, that should be their guy if they wait for a receiver?
It depends on what they want, because I think Brendan Thompson, I feel like he's kind of what you wanted Kyle Williams to be. So I feel like they'd be maybe a little bit redundant in that. So at this point in the draft, again, if you want that pure slot skill set, I'd probably lean towards a guy named Kevin Coleman out of Missouri, who's really a true slot receiver, but even he's kind of, I'd say, redundant to Pop Douglas. There's a lot of these guys in that Pop Douglas-ish mold this year who are undersized separators, but it's just like they're too undersized to really play a real role, a consistent role in the NFL offense. I think the guy that I get a little bit more excited about at this point in time, who can wear a lot of hats, is a guy named Eric McAllister from TCU. He's great after the catch, and more of a physical sort of wide receiver. He's a lot bigger. He's 6'2", over 200 pounds. He's a guy that I think if you're building a well-rounded trio of wide receivers, and bring in Romeo Doubs, it's kind of the Packers model of wide receivers, right? Where every guy can play every role in the offense. That's one of the beauties of a guy like that. I think that's what McAllister could bring to the table and give you a lot more flexibility offensively because of it.
Really, really talented guy. Some off-field stuff that the Patriots would have to sort of sort through and feel okay with, but I like this trio too. This is a nice little trio for the listeners at home. Cassius Howell in the first round, Caleb Tiernan in the second, and then maybe Eric McAllister out of TCU in the third to sort of round out your receiver core. Mike, thank you so much for spending as much time as you have with us. For the people listening, just some inside baseball. I had no idea it would take this long to get through this, to get through all of these scenarios. And Mike is just patiently there taking all questions, and he's giving us all kinds of fantastic content. And he probably missed like 7 or 8 appointments between the time we started and now. But we appreciate you, bud. This has been fantastic. For more great Mike Renner content, okay? The Pushing the Pile Pod, CBS Sports. You do tremendous work, bud. We thank you so much for sharing all of your insights here with us today.
Of course. Honestly, it felt like 10 minutes. I didn't realize it had been a half hour. It doesn't even faze me. This is what I live for.
When you're having fun and when you haven't moved from that chair in 2 weeks because you're grinding so much tape, like time is just a concept. Isn't it, Mike? Thank you again, buddy.
Exactly.
This is great. Always great to talk to you. Hopefully we get a chance to catch up soon.
Of course. Good talking to Phil.
John Sewer and Drain Cleaning takes clogged drains seriously. Their large team of technicians is trained to solve any clog or issue in Boston's complex draining systems. With over 40 years of success serving in and around Boston, John Sewer is your local clogged drain expert. With over 40 technicians on the road, they're equipped to respond to your emergency. Visit johnsewer.com to learn more. Awesome stuff there from Mike. Always great to chat with him. And I feel like that's a great exercise for us to go through. And if you're looking at those three different trios that we were able to build, which one makes the most sense to you? Which one is most palatable? I feel like, honestly, after looking at it, that first trio that we were able to put together, that piqued my interest. You're talking about Omar Cooper Jr. out of Indiana, one of my favorite receivers in this year's draft. Will do all sorts of dirty work for you. Can work in the middle of the field, create yards after the catch because he's just such a physical player. This guy's a dog now. All right, and so Mike Vrabel, I think, would really be intrigued by the possibility of Omar Cooper in the first round. Then you end up adding Jayshon Barham, who, again, not only do I like him, not only does Renner like him, Field Yates likes him as well. He seems like a Patriots type out of Michigan in the second round, and then you go Travis Burke in the third, just mean, nasty, physical, violent, massive potential right tackle prospect, guy who's made a visit to the Patriots. That's a nice little group right there. But I think all three have their merits. Maxi Hanachor, there's your right tackle of the future. I feel you're more secure there. That's something that personally I've been pushing for. I know I just said I like that trio with Burke as the third round pick at tackle, but I think you might want to. It might be most prudent to invest a little earlier at that position just so you're guarded against the worst case scenario this season. So Hanachor, Antonio Williams, and Romello Height. And then the last group I think probably gives me the most pause just because Cassius Howell, if you take him in the first round, can you play him on first and second down? And I understand that could potentially be a question with Barham too. I just would have fewer questions about Barham's physical traits. Maybe he's a little more raw, a little less experienced on the edge, of course, than somebody like Cassius Howell. But do you feel completely comfortable playing him on early downs against the run? That would just give me some pause for a team that I think needs like a do-it-all type on the edge behind Harold Landry and Draymond Jones. Like whoever they draft, if they take one in the first or second round at that edge spot, you got to think not only is that guy going to be in the top three probably right away for the Patriots in that rotation on the edge, but they've got to be ready to be a starting caliber kind of player just based on what we've seen from Harold Landry and just knowing that he was as banged up as he was this past season. Again, and you hate to bring up worst case scenarios, but I think it's the smart thing to do. Proper preparation prevents poor performance, friends. Learned that from my good friend Jerry Hubbard at BC High back as a freshman in his American history class, U.S. history. One of the greatest classes of all time. If you don't prepare for the worst when it comes to Morgan Moses, Harold Landry, I think you run the risk of being that team that we've talked about all offseason that you don't want to be, which is the Washington Commanders from 2025. And I know, Commanders fans will tell me the reason they didn't have a great year was because their quarterback got hurt. That very well may be true. They also got old, stayed old at certain positions, and then weren't really ready to deal with the repercussions of that. And so I just would be wary of leaning too much on players that you know are relatively risky, okay? And so having the proper insurance policies in place to me would be really smart. So that last trio of Howell, Tiernan, and then whether it's McAllister, who, again, the off-field stuff there's some really serious stuff there on his record they would have to come to grips with if they thought about taking him, especially in the third round. Maybe later on day 3, you'd be a little bit more comfortable with a player like that, taking a flyer on him. But even if it's Kevin Coleman, the slot receiver out of Missouri that Mike mentioned there, that trio would maybe have me a little less excited than the first two. So great exercise, as we mentioned. And let's get to, because there are some crossover names here, let's get to our best fits at tackle. And we're going to have these for each and every position that matters when it comes to the buildup to the draft over on NBCSportsBoston.com. But Blake Miller's our number one guy. And he was top of the list for Mike as well. But when it comes to day one, and that's how we broke him down, day 1, day 2, day 3. Day 1, it's Miller, it's Ihanachour for all the reasons Mike just mentioned. Day 2, we had Tiernan there at the top of the list. I also mentioned Markel Bell. He'll be really interesting as somebody who it feels like has projections that are all over the map right now for where he'll end up in the draft. 6'9", 346 pounds, unbelievably long arms, over 36 inches. This guy is a gargantuan tackle prospect. But everything I've heard, smart guy, a guy who's on an upward trajectory, who has improved each and every year. There are tons of Miami connections in this Patriots front office between Elliott Wolf and Alonzo Highsmith and Alonzo Highsmith's son, A.J. Highsmith, who's a director of pro scouting now. But they've got really good intel coming out of Miami as to just, how these kids work and what they're like behind the scenes. And so if they were to take him on day 2, say it's at that 95th overall pick, that wouldn't stun me because of those connections and just because of the rare traits that this guy has. And if the Patriots want to be, and this is one of the schematic themes that I will be digging into as much as humanly possible, not only now, but well into the start of the offseason program, through training camp, into the beginning of the regular season. Who are they, and what is their identity specifically as a run game offensively in 2026? Because right now, when you continue to move forward with Mike Renner, you got, I think, a little more powerful at center in Jared Wilson by making that swap, Garrett Bradbury for Wilson. Morgan Moses, not a small human. You're talking about some big physical. Will Campbell, I think in terms of how his game is already developed, it's probably more advanced as a run blocker, and he's a powerful guy, an aggressive guy, a violent mindset kind of player. We'll see on Elijah Vera Tucker, right? But he has the ability to do that too, just get downhill. He's got plenty of athleticism, don't get me wrong, as does Campbell and Wilson. So those guys could run a variety of different schemes, but it just feels like right now, especially with Onwenu in there, as, maybe arguably your best offensive lineman late in the season, this unit is built to lean on people and get downhill and run power schemes and run duo and counter and pull guards and get after you and not worry so much about wide zone and zone runs and hauling ass to the sideline. Like, it just doesn't, to me, feel like how they're built right now. Now, that could change based on some moving parts, based on whatever Mike Vrabel wants. I mean, I thought, some of Drake May's best plays were his rollouts, especially early in midseason. But as the season went on, I think what you saw was, and you saw this on I can picture in my mind's eye, one play in particular in the Super Bowl, there really wasn't a whole lot of reason for defenses to buy the play fakes on those plays. They weren't a wide zone heavy kind of team in terms of their run game. So if you want to run those fakes because you like your quarterback getting out on the move and making that choice between running the football himself, maybe dumping it off to a tight end in the short area, or maybe pulling the trigger and throwing one deeper down the sideline, like, that's great, and that works really well for your quarterback skill set. But if that backside edge, that backside pass rusher has no respect for you actually handing off the football there, he's chilling. He's just waiting for the quarterback to come right back around, and suddenly he's in Drake May's face and he's got nowhere to go with the football. So you could, A, marry more of your run game concepts with those play action looks and become more of a threat with the wide zone run game, and I'll leave open that possibility that that's what they'll do. Or B, you just go all in on the downhill gap scheme stuff. And your play action stuff and your quarterback will, your play action stuff would have to be married to that. As it was this past year as well, they had plenty of play action passes that look like duo, that maybe look like power, and they had success with those too. And you could look at that and say, yeah, but we're not getting the quarterback on the move as much. We'd love to get him. Well, like, you might be putting him in a bad spot by forcing some of those play action rollouts if the defense ain't buying it. So you got to do one of those two things, in my opinion. And if you go with the second thing and you just lean on the gap schemes and you lean on the power and you lean on the play action concepts that are built off of that, okay, you'd love to get your quarterback on the move a little bit more. There's still some things you could do. You could still do some moving pocket plays. You could still do some sort of sprint out types of plays. But you're also going to get him on the move just as a scrambler in general. That's just part of his game. And so you're going to be able to leverage his athleticism in some ways. You just might not have those same types of West Coasty looks in the play action game. So all that being said, that's a little bit of a tangent, but it relates to Markel Bell, right? If you look at Markel Bell as a day 2 pick and as a potential successor for Morgan Moses, well, you probably ain't going big time wide zone anytime soon because now you've got Markel Bell, who's a fine athlete for his size, but he is not what you would think of as a West Coast outside zone, wide zone type of offensive lineman. You're getting downhill. You're going to use that power. You're going to use that girth and just, again, lean on opposing defensive lines and create space that way. So that would be an interesting pick for that reason, because I think of what it might say about your scheme. Day 3, the 2 names we mentioned, one of them is Travis Burke. So we won't go through that again, but incredibly violent guy. Okay, the last name we'll mention here as a potential day 3 fit, who knows, maybe he ends up going on day 2, is Jude Bowery out of Boston College. Had a chance to watch Bowery up close at his pro day. Seemed to go really well. He tested great at the combine, so he didn't go through all the athletic testing stuff. I mean, ran a 5.08 second 40. That's 80th percentile for tackles at the combine. Jumped 34 and a half inches in the vertical. That is eye-popping. That's 96th percentile for offensive tackles. 9.7 in the broad. That's 95th percentile. So when it comes to Bowery, a couple different things at play here. Number one, the physical traits are rare because he's 6'5", 314, 34-inch arms. To move the way he does, a lot of those guys end up going on day 1. Never mind day 2 or 3. Now, I don't think he's going to be a first-round pick, but does he go somewhere even in the second round? Just because those physical gifts are so rare. Those guys, generally speaking, don't last long. So that's one area that makes Bowery a really interesting prospect, is everything he brings to the table physically, and how early will teams be willing to bet on that. The other thing, obviously there are a ton of connections between BC and the Patriots specifically, right? Bill O'Brien is great friends with Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel's son, Tyler, has worked at BC. Doug Marrone, Patriots offensive line coach, has worked at BC and has worked with these players that were working out at the Pro Day on Monday. So there's a lot of connections there. Dante Scarnecchia is working out with a handful of linemen, both in the NFL and guys looking to get into the NFL. Bowery's one of those. So he's gotten really good coaching. He's getting really good coaching right now from Dante Scarnecchia, one of the best all time when it comes to teaching players at that position. And so you have to like that if you're an NFL team looking at Bowery. I think what you might be asking is, where do we play him? Right? He's a left tackle by trade. He was asked to play right tackle at the Senior Bowl. I think by his own admission, he would say it didn't go great for him, but is new. Right? And so is he the kind of athlete, and this is what I think teams will be betting on, that can flip from one side to the other? It's not easy, and there are plenty of guys who haven't been able to do it. Bill Belichick used to talk all the time about, Matt Light just couldn't do it. Couldn't do it on the right side. Ends up being a great left tackle for championship teams with the Patriots. We saw Nate Solder play both sides. He really settled in at left tackle, but early in his career was able to get by on the right side. We saw Sebastian Vollmer fill in at left tackle at times. He was a guy who could get by on both sides. So it depends on the player. Bowery certainly seems like the kind of athlete who can handle both. And again, when you're working with Dante Scarnecchia, friend of the Next Pats podcast, Dante Scarnecchia, I wouldn't put it past him to be able to learn and acquire some of those skills. Here's what Bowery had to say after his pro day about working with the great Dante Scarnecchia.
Coach Carr is great, man. It's great to work with him. He's a legend. He's helped me a lot with my punch and just, being a better overall player. So he's seen the game in many ways, and I just appreciate everything he's done. So
I also had a chance to just ask Bill O'Brien, obviously, who understands what it takes to succeed at the NFL level, why his guys, Bowery and Logan Taylor, who's more of an interior prospect but super versatile, could play all four positions, really anything but center. Somebody who also had a very good combine and did not end up participating in the testing portion of his pro day, but worked out. He's 6'7", 314. So large human being, 34-inch arms, 10.5-inch hands, really good 40-yard dash at 5.18 in the 40. That's 72nd percentile. He went 9 feet in the broad jump, which is 82nd percentile. So some good lower body explosiveness there from Taylor. Good versatility there from Taylor, somebody who is also working out with Dante Scarnecchia. And so I asked Bill O'Brien why he thinks Bowery and Taylor, those guys will be good fits for an NFL program.
Look, I think they're very talented. I think they're tough. I think they're smart. They understand line play. They can communicate, which is the key up front, to be able to, communicate with the guy next to you, to see things through the same set of eyes. I just think that they're versatile. They can play different positions. Logan Taylor played left tackle, right guard, left guard. He did everything but play center for us. Jude can play left tackle, right tackle. So I think the versatility, their intelligence, their character, I think they would be great fits in an NFL locker room.
Bill O'Brien knows what the league wants. He knows what Mike Vrabel wants as well. And so wouldn't stun me at all to see either one of those guys, Taylor or Bowery, end up with the Patriots at some point on draft weekend. Okay, we promised a little bit of mailbag. Let's get to a little bit of mailbag before we sign off. Let's start with Paradiddle Labatt. I'm hearing a lot of discourse around our lack of tackle depth, he says, as we approach the draft. Whatever happened to Caden Wallace? Is he just not good? Just wondering if the answer to that depth question is in-house. Love the pod. Thank you, Paradiddle. When it comes to Caden Wallace, they've been playing him more at guard, so more of an interior option for the Patriots. You never know. Maybe they eventually feel as though the best option for them in terms of finding more tackle depth is in-house. Marcus Bryant was a 7th-round pick out of Missouri last year. Now, he ended up being a healthy scratch. Remember, they acquired Thayer Munford. They reacquired Thayer Munford during the season. He ended up being their jumbo tight end and really having a significant role for the team late in the season. But he sort of ended up as their swing tackle in uniform on game days, and there were a few games at the end of the year where Bryant was a healthy scratch. So, I'm not sure necessarily if you're depending on Bryant to be that third guy, to be that fill-in immediately. If something were to happen with either Will Campbell or Morgan Moses, But I know Bryant and Moses worked a lot together. I know Bryant really leaned on some of those veterans in that offensive line room. And so, my guess is they'll have a plan for him. The question is he ready to do that kind of job right away? Again, if something happens in training camp, are you comfortable with Marcus Bryant as your right tackle for weeks, for an indeterminate amount of time? I'm not so sure about that. I do think tackle is a spot they should be addressing in the draft. And Elliot Wolf told us as much at this year's combine. He said, he was asked if tackle was a need, and he didn't say, well, we like the idea of re-signing Thayer Munford, who's still unsigned, by the way. We really like Marcus Bryant. I think he had a pretty good idea that Vidarian Lowe was going to be moving on. Lowe is now in San Francisco. But, he mentioned that offensive line and offensive tackle in particular is going to be a need for them. So pay attention when we're talking about all these tackles in the draft. Could be a spot they end up turning to relatively early. Okay, our friend KO Diva. She asks, what are your thoughts on the Pats drafting a pass-catching tight end? Is it feasible? Is it warranted? Not going to lie, I had high hopes for Asiasi and Keene. You weren't the only one, Karen. It still pains me that neither panned out. A tough 2020 draft class there when it came to the tight end situation. We will have our best fits at tight end coming up soon for you on NBCSportsBoston.com. One name I really like is Oscar Delp from Georgia, somebody who can catch the football. Numbers aren't going to jump out at you in terms of what he was able to do for the Bulldogs this past season, but really willing blocker and somebody who's going to get after it in that phase. And when you see our favorite tight ends for the Patriots, you're going to notice, KO, that like that's going to be a trend. Will Kazmarek from Ohio State might not even be the best tight end at Ohio State, but depending on what you're looking for, I think he could be the best fit for the Patriots. He's going to block his ass off. Now, Max Clare's another player, sort of an ascending guy, baseball, football player at Purdue. He ends up focusing on football, a little bit of a do-it-all kind of tight end, probably a better athlete, especially with the ball in his hands, than Kazmarek. But I really like on day 3, if you want somebody who's going to be able to play on the line and give you a little something, I think he could give you something as a receiver too. That to me is a name worth considering. Sam Roush from Stanford's a name we've mentioned a bunch of times, whether it's here or on the Patriots Talk podcast. That's a guy that I actually could envision being a future fill-in for Hunter Henry. Now, is he going to be as good in the passing game as Hunter Henry? I'm not sure. But great size, 267 pounds. You can plop him on the line. You feel totally comfortable with him as a blocker. He's got a little bit shorter arms, and so, as a red zone threat down the seam, do you worry about that showing up? Maybe, but with the ball in his hands, he's tough to bring down. He's a really good athlete. He tested off the charts at the combine, and so, that's an area for me where I would be looking. So, your true pass-catching wide receiver types, I'm just not sure for Mike Vrabel and Josh McDaniels that's what they're looking for. You have to give something in the passing game. I get it. You can't be a glorified tackle. But you also have to have some real physicality, I think, especially if you're going to be a team that wants to get downhill and wants to run the ball. Look at their offseason additions. Reggie Gilliam at fullback, Julian Hill at tight end. These guys want to rip your face off as blockers, okay? And so maybe that means more room for a receiver masquerading as a tight end. And Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt, who I think will probably go in the second round somewhere. Tremendous athlete, really bright individual, but not going to give you a whole lot in the run game. Maybe you look at it and say, well, that's what those other guys are for. We need some playmakers at that tight end position. Maybe that's the way they'll go. I just think, especially the way Josh McDaniels has operated in the past, you got to be able to do a little bit of both. Rob Gronkowski is the obvious example. Even Aaron Hernandez was willing to mix it up. A much different type of player, different type of tight end, more of a move tight end. Dwayne Allen, that guy was heavy on the line of scrimmage. Like, you could use him as a blocker. You could use him as a move blocking type of player. Like, just Ben Watson, massive body, freaky athlete, but was going to be a problem for people at the second level if he could get his hands on him. Like, I think these tight ends that are really receivers, to me, they feel like misfits in this Patriots scheme, the way at least we have seen it in the past. So again, let's leave that door open a crack for those other types of guys. But I think you got to be able to block, and some of those names I just mentioned are guys that are going to be willing to do that. Turb Pats asks, do you think Tennessee wide receiver Chris Brazzell has a chance to go to the Patriots? I think he has a chance, especially if they feel like they want that taller guy outside the numbers. They don't get A.J. Brown, and they want X plays, as Mike Vrabel likes to call them. You want those explosive shots down the field. You want somebody who runs a 4.37 at 6'4", 200 pounds, and that's Brazzell. I mean, that stuff is rare. That kind of length, that frame, that kind of speed. He comes from a wonky offense. He worries me a little bit. A little bit of a wonky offense at Tennessee. We've seen in the past, Patriots young receivers have a difficult time picking up this offense if you're really far removed from what the Patriots are doing, and then you're dropped in, coming from a place like Tennessee as a pro in New England. How well do you pick that up? Now, they have an opportunity to talk to these guys all throughout the process. You should be able to get a pretty good feel for that. And again, the traits are rare. So if you want those types of big plays down the field, sure, maybe. But would they be willing to invest in a guy like that who, to me, has some real question marks? Say it's in the second round, in the 60s there for Brazzell. That might be a little rich. So would I be willing to do it? I would say right now, no. Would they? based on how important they know X plays are. And can I do the X plays in air quotes for all the people on YouTube? It's one thing I shouldn't really care. I just don't understand, like, why are we losing the couple extra syllables there? Okay, don't get hung up on it, Phil. All right, let's move on. If you're as obsessed with explosive plays as the Patriots are, that could be the kind of player that you'd be interested in. Again, especially if you don't end up trading for A.J. Brown, which I think they're going to end up doing. I don't know what the compensation is. I don't know what that ends up looking like. Maybe it's with that pick that they would have to take Brazel with. Maybe it's with 63 overall, somewhere involved in that package in this year's draft class. But so if I were a betting man, I wouldn't bet on them landing Chris Brazel. But let's see. Really interesting traits. Okay, a couple more questions here. Clint asks, what's the likelihood the Patriots select a linebacker in the first 3 rounds? Really interesting class. A lot of really good linebackers in this class that I think would be fits for the Patriots. You're not necessarily in that mode anymore that we were in for a long time here in New England, where you had to be a certain size to play that position. Really narrowed the pool of players. And yes, they dipped in on guys like Marte Mapu in that old Patriot system. But that was more of like a tweener situation and a special team situation. And, gone are the days where, you need to be 255 pounds to play inside linebacker for the Patriots. It wouldn't stun me if they took one in the 3rd round. It would surprise me if they took one in the 1st or 2nd. So you have Robert Spillane. You have Christian Ellis. That, to me, is a nice starting pair right there. Is KJ Britt somebody who's going to play a ton for them? They just acquired him this offseason. I don't know. Again, so you might want to dip in, right around that 100th overall pick mark. Like, that might be where you want to go. But I don't see it as big a need as some others do. Curran is foremost among them. I think Tom Curran thinks linebacker's real need. To me, it's one of those positions where you've really only got 2 on the field most of the time. Anyway, now, if the Patriots are looking at it and saying the run games become more and more important and you've got to get more big bodies on the field, then, maybe they feel that way and they would want to add somebody in this year's draft class. But it's not an incredibly pressing need as far as I'm concerned. Gooley asks, which rookie from this past season makes the biggest leap into year 2? Really good question, because I think there's some good candidates there. Will Campbell as a pass protector. I don't want to say you have to get rid of what happened in the postseason to Will Campbell. I just would say you're probably going to get a better sense for who he is and his true starting point as a player if you look at what he did in the first 12 weeks of the regular season. He suffered a knee injury, missed a bunch of time, came back, and he looked like a guy who didn't have his legs under him. So that's why I say that. So there's the potential there for more of a leap from Will Campbell, who was really a middle-of-the-pack tackle, depending on some of the numbers, in those first 12 weeks. Can he get up into that top 12-ish tier? I think that's what he should be pursuing. Top 5 pick, really good athlete. We know what he's dealing with in terms of length, but I think he could get there. So there's a potential one. Jared Wilson, for me, might be the answer, though. To go from guard to center, there's going to be a lot going on for him at that center spot. I think if he can grow and develop, he can make them a really dangerous offensive line if he becomes the kind of center that they think he could be. The other selection here that I would be looking at just in terms of leaps would be Kyle Williams. And now will he get the opportunity to do that? If they trade for A.J. Brown, maybe not. There's only so many snaps to go around because you're going to be playing A.J. Brown. You're going to be playing Romeo Doubs. We know that. Kayshon Boutte is going to be in the mix, as is Mac Hollins. And so, if you're looking for a crazy leap from Kyle Williams, like, is he going to get the opportunity to do that if he's not, a quote-unquote starting caliber player when it comes to the number of snaps he gets? So let's keep an eye on that one. If they don't end up drafting a receiver in those first 3 rounds, right? If the Patriots say, idiotic exercise that was, those terrific trios. What are they doing that for? We didn't want a receiver in the first 3 rounds. We got Kyle Williams. Okay, then he might have a chance to make the kind of leap you're asking about, Gooley. I just am not 100% sure it's going to play out that way. Okay, last one here. This is from Winfellas. Is there enough money to go around if the Patriots trade for Brown? Knowing you've got Gonzalez potentially this year, May next year. There is enough money to go around. The Patriots certainly could do it. The question is, do they want to? Does the owner want to? That, to me, is the real question. The cap situation, easily figured out. When you're talking about extensions for Drake May, the cap numbers don't start to get huge until you get a little bit deeper into the deal. The same would be true in all likelihood for Christian Gonzalez. So you get these big old signing bonuses, and those get spread throughout the length of the deal. And as the base salaries climb, you pair it with the prorated portion of the signing bonus for a given year, and that's where you get some of those massive cap hits. But they could do it easily. It's not even a concern. And what I would say is, given the links that have been made between A.J. Brown and the Patriots for so long now at this point, and it's clear, the Patriots would be a logical landing spot for A.J. Brown. My guess is those conversations have already occurred between the football operation and Robert Kraft, and they know what they have to plan for moving forward. They know what kind of deal, in all likelihood, Christian Gonzalez is going to accept. They know what kind of deal, in all likelihood, Drake May is going to accept. There's not a ton of quarterbacks, it looks like, that are going to be getting new deals anytime soon that are necessarily going to reset the market. I'm not saying you could do the deal right now and you could craft it and it'd be good to go and you just sit on it for a year and then you hand it to Drake May so he can sign it next year, which is the earliest he can do that kind of thing. But you've got an idea. You know what you need to plan for. So it's going to be $60+ million for Drake May. It's going to be $30+ million a year for Christian Gonzalez, whatever the guaranteed numbers end up looking like. That's the ballpark you're talking about. And with A.J. Brown, it's actually, when you're talking about a number one receiver, it's a relatively affordable contract. It's basically a 2-year deal, $25 million per year. Might seem like a lot because it's what Tom Brady wanted back in the day, and the Patriots said, no, you can go find somewhere else to work. But that's essentially what it would be for A.J. Brown, and that is a bargain. Look at the $40+ million a year deal that Jackson Smith-Njigba just got. I'm not saying the Patriots wouldn't rather have Smith-Njigba over Brown, and age and injury history and all that. He's a great player, Smith-Njigba is. But it just tells you where the market is for a true number one receiver, and you look at A.J. Brown's numbers, not all that painful. So yes, to answer your question, Winfellas, they do have the space. They could figure it out. They do have the cash. They can figure it out. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Next Pats podcast. Thanks so much to Mike Renner for being with us. Another marathon edition of Next Pats. Hopefully you're loving the content. We are loving providing it for you. Please, on YouTube, if you could subscribe if you haven't already, that would be tremendous. Hit that thumbs up button as well for us. Leave us a review on our Apple Podcasts. We always love those. We love you so much. We mean it. We'll be right back here next week with another edition of Next Pats, another great guest. We'll talk to you next time.